Okay. Hello, everyone. We have a lot of people still arriving, so we're just going to wait another minute or two before we get going here. But thank you for taking the time out of your day to be here with us today. Looks like we have about 21 people so far, which is a great turnout. I'm glad you're all so excited to learn about certification. All right, the arrivals have slowed down. It's 1:31. So Jenny, I'll leave it to you to admit people who are still coming in, if that's okay. And
sure.
we will go ahead and get started. So again, thank you all for being here today. I appreciate you taking some time to spend a little bit of your afternoon with us to learn about Wisconsin Librarian Certification. My name's Teresa Schmidt. I'm the Public Library Administration Consultant here at DPI. And with me is Jenny Schomber. She is a public library consultant, and she's going to help me out with monitoring the chat, monitoring the Q&A, and taking care of the business side of things while I give you a little presentation this morning. So thank you, Jenny, for being here. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks.
All right. So let's go ahead and get started. First of all, I will let you know that you guys do have the ability to turn on your microphones and turn on your cameras. If you have a question that you want to ask out loud instead of typing it in, you can do that. I would suggest, though, that you wait till the end. We are going to have a good amount of time for questions. I have a presentation that I will start with today that I expect to last about 30 minutes. Just going to do a little brief overview of the certification process, and you can feel free to enter your questions in the Q&A. There is also a chat available if you want to chat. And I just want to make sure, can an attendee somewhere let me know that you can actually hear me and see my slides? You can put it in the chat, or you could unmute yourself and say, yep, I hear you.
I can hear you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kristen. I appreciate that. We had a little hiccup with Teams once before, and I didn't want to be talking to nobody. So, all right, excellent. All right, well, then let's get going with the presentation. So as the Public Library Administration Consultant, I am the one that you are primarily going to interact with when you apply for and renew your certification in Wisconsin. So Jenny also has done a lot of these tasks. She's very familiar with the process. So just to let you know that I am here anytime for your questions. Please do feel free to email me at any time or give me a call if you do have questions about librarian certification. So why do we certify library directors? Well, the state of Wisconsin has an interest in providing quality library service to the entire state and all of the residents within it. So the certification law is there to ensure that we have qualified and trained staff running our libraries. And basically, you are required to be certified because it is in the state statutes. It's in Wisconsin Statutes Chapter 43. It's also in the Administrative Code PI 6. So that process is laid out for me by statute, and I do have to follow the rules that are there. So this is not something that DPI staff have just made up or are making up on the fly. These are things that are backed up by statutory requirements. So today I am going to give a brief overview of the new certification manual that was released in just over a month ago. The manual itself says October. It was actually made public in early November, I believe. We'll talk about who needs to be certified, when you should apply. We'll talk about how you select what grade or status that you're applying for. We'll talk about the application and renewal process. We'll talk about your continuing education requirements as a library director in the state. And we'll talk about what happens if you are not in compliance with the state statutes surrounding certification. And as I said, I expect that to last about 30 minutes. I hope that we'll have about 30 minutes for questions, and hopefully we'll be wrapping up right around 2:30. But my afternoon is pretty open, so if people need to stick around and ask more questions, you're welcome to do that. So just to start out with the thing that is probably on the minds of a lot of you who have already been certified and already are somewhat familiar with the process, we did release a new edition of the Wisconsin Certification Manual for Public Library Directors. It is shorter than the last one. We hope that we have simplified the language in it for you so that it make it a little more easy to understand. There are not a lot of changes to the process. The requirements for your education are all the same. The time periods that you have to work within are all the same. There are a couple of minor changes to continuing education requirements. One of those is that we used to state that continuing education had to be a minimum of 1 hour, and we no longer state that. You are allowed to count fractions of an hour for your certification. The reason we've done that is basically at the request of librarians. It's easier to squeeze in a half-an-hour training if there's something available to you. And there are some of our library education organizations that are interested in providing shorter CE sessions. So for example, Web Junction this year is going to start implementing some 30-minute trainings. So that being said, I encourage you to reach out to your system CE validator. They do not want to deal with, like, I don't know, 110-minute sessions that you have completed. There's a reasonable, like, practical minimum, but there is no official minimum from DPI. So if you ever have questions about whether something would qualify as continuing education credit, always reach out to your CE validator. They're the ones who make those decisions. They know who to reach out to if they aren't sure about the answer. But I encourage you to talk to them if you have something that's really short and you're worried that maybe it's just not enough to count. The other change that's in the new manual is, and we're going to talk specifically later about the categories of continuing ed, but the other change is that category C, which are self-directed continuing education activities, will need to be pre-approved by your CE validators beginning in January 1 of 2025. So it used to be that you could do these and then talk to your CE validator about how many hours you could count. We are now requiring that you have a conversation with your CE validator in advance to describe to them what you're planning to do and how many hours you think you can gain from that. And again, your CE validators will be able to best direct you on the way to go about that and what information they want from you to be able to pre-approve those activities. We will talk about it a little bit more in detail when I get further down the line and we're talking about continuing education requirements. So the other thing I want to encourage you to use is our website. Not everything is in the manual anymore. We tried to simplify the manual so it wasn't a 50-page document or whatever it had been in the past. And we've included a lot of the supplementary information as links to our website rather than as appendices in the manual. Everything you need is actually on the website. A PDF copy of that certification manual if you want to have it for your reference. There's an overview of the application process and instructions. And there are a lot of forms and reference documents that I'm going to show you today, but that you're not going to be able to see very well in this format. So I'm going to encourage you to go to our website and download them later. And I will provide these slides. I put a copy of these slides in the chat before all of you arrived. I don't know if you can see those. I'm not quite sure how Teams works on that. So if you can't see that, I will share it again at the end of this presentation. And I will be sharing the recording of this presentation and notes from the Q&A after my formal presentation is done on our website later. And I'll be sending that out through the usual online email lists and things like that. So getting into the nitty-gritty of who must be certified. By statute, all directors of public libraries in Wisconsin must be certified, and all directors of public library systems in Wisconsin must be certified. So those are the only requirements. Other staff at a library is not required to hold certification. Some do, and there is a process for voluntary certification. It works basically the same as the process required of directors. It's just that it's not actually required. So if you're interested in being certified, even if you're not required to be, you can do that and you can follow the same process. There's really no downside to being voluntarily certified, except that once you've started the certification process or once you've become certified, you need to stay on top of your continuing education in order to keep that certification. For directors, because it's a statutory requirement, we really encourage libraries to provide their directors with funding for continuing ed. And that's not always the case for other staff, although we highly encourage libraries to be able to provide continuing education for all of their staff, but it's not required for certification. So when should you apply? If you are a newly hired library director and you are eligible for regular certification, and I'll talk in a few minutes about what it means to be eligible for that, you should apply immediately. And we say apply within 1 month of your hire date. That is because you must have a certified director at your library. So the longer that goes on, without a certified director at the library, the longer your library is in non-compliance. And then we have to track that and make sure that you're making progress towards compliance. If you are a newly hired director and you're not eligible yet for regular certification, but you are eligible for temporary certification, the Administrative Code PI6 does specifically state that you have to apply within 3 months of your hire date. And that is a specific requirement that I can't really be flexible about. It is written into the Administrative Code. It does not happen frequently that we deny applications because of that, but it has happened at least once that I'm aware of based on our records. So please do, if you're a system member, a staff member here listening today, make sure that your new directors are making their application within that 3 months of their hire date. Just will make it simpler for everybody. If you already have librarian certification and you are renewing your certificate, please apply during the month in which your certificate expires. So your certificate probably says something like it is valid through the last day of October 2025. Then you should be applying sometime between October 1 and October 31, during that calendar month that your certificate is going to expire. If you send your files to me early, I'm going to hang on to them until your expiration month and then renew them at that time. If you think, as some people might, that they could apply early to renew and then get sort of a jump start on next year's continuing ed requirements, because maybe you have all your hours and then you're going to go to the conference next month and you want to count those hours, it doesn't work that way, unfortunately. The Administrative Code says you have to complete your continuing ed within your 5-year certification period, and I am supposed to renew your certificate during the month in which it expires. So you can't really get a jump start on your next period's CE by renewing early. The only exception to that is if you're upgrading your certificate. So if you are going from, say, grade 3 to grade 2 because you finished a bachelor's degree, or you finished your master's and you're going to grade 1, or you've finished all of your required library courses and you're going from temporary to regular certification, in that case, it is up to you if you want to apply right away for your regular certificate or your upgraded certificate, or if you want to wait until the month that your certificate expires. I will take either at that point. And I know how exciting it can be to get that new certificate with your upgraded credentials on it. And a lot of people do want to get started on their regular certification process and their continuing ed once they've done their basic requirements. So in that case, you are allowed to choose whether you want to wait till your certificate is expiring or do it a little bit early. So I'm just going to pause for a second, check in with Jenny, and see if we have any questions that have come in so far.
No questions in the chat, no questions in the Q&A, and Meredith Meredith in the chat did ask that you do share the slides because they are not showing up in chat for everybody.
Okay, thank you. I will do that at the end of this presentation.
At the end, yes. Yep.
Sounds great. All right, thank you. So let's move on. So when you get a certificate, a librarian certificate in Wisconsin, there are 2 main parts of that certificate. Its grade and its status. The grade is determined by your education level. And there is a requirement for every library in the state for a grade level based on that community's population. Every library system director must have grade 1 certification. And this is all in a table later, so you don't need to take notes, but I'll just let you know briefly. Grade 1 certification is required for any library serving a community with a population greater than 6,000 residents. Grade 2 is from 3,000 to 6,000, and grade 3 is under 3,000 population. And what determines whether you're eligible for one of those grades is your education level. So for a grade 1, you have to have a completed master's degree in library science from an ALA accredited school to be fully grade 1 certified. Grade 2 requires a bachelor's degree, and grade 3 requires at least 54 college credits, half of which have to be in liberal arts and sciences. And I do have to check your transcripts to make sure that you have at least half of those, that 27 credits in liberal arts and sciences. So if your degree is in something that doesn't fall into that category, or if you have an associate's degree or have completed some college and you're not sure, you can always send your transcript to me and I could take a look at it before you apply if that's something you're concerned about. So your grade level is required by the population that you serve. Your status can be one of a few things. It can be regular status, meaning you've completed everything you need to be fully certified as a librarian. You can have temporary status, which means you have completed your basic education requirements, but you still have some library-specific education to complete. Provisional, I'll talk about in a little bit. That is a very rare case in Wisconsin, but I'll mention it later. And lapsed is if you were previously certified and maybe you took a job where you didn't need certification and you didn't keep up with it. You can apply to reinstate a lapsed certificate through a certain process, which I'll mention briefly later.
Teresa, there is a question in the Q&A, and the question is, say your community size changes and suddenly your library needs a higher grade library director than before. What happens?
Yep, and that is provisional certification, which I just briefly mentioned. So what happens is DPI does kind of keep track of those service populations for your libraries, because we are the ones who make the label on every library that says what grade you need. If you are currently employed at a library, let's say your community's population is 5,000 people, and then a new plant opens up or something, and a lot of people move into your community, and now you're over 6,000 and you require grade 1 certification. We are not going to make you get fired from your job. What happens in that case is if you have successfully been serving your community and you have kept up with your certification, we will give you provisional status for the grade level that you need to keep serving that community, as long as you stay there and as long as you keep doing your continuing education requirements. So in the case that the example I just gave, that person would be bumped up from a grade 2 to a grade 1 provisional certificate as long as they stayed employed at that library. If they wanted to go take another job somewhere else, then they would actually, their certificate would be dropped back down to the level for which they have the proper education. And so in this case, grade 2. So that person would not be able to go on and take another job at a grade 1 library without doing their education, but they would be able to continue to serve the community they have been employed by. All right. So this chart, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on because it is one of those resources that's on our website. But if you are newly applying to become a library director in the state and you're not sure of what grade or status you qualify for, this is a flow chart that can kind of help you determine that. And it basically looks at your education level first, and then whether or not you finish those education requirements and whether or not you finish some additional courses that are required. So this document, again, available on our website. You probably can't see it super well now, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time, but it's there as a resource for you. There's also a chart, again, available on our website, and this one does a little more carefully spell out the requirements for each grade level. So I want to spend just a moment on this because this is where we determine whether you're eligible for regular certification or temporary certification. In order to be hired as a library director in the state, you have to be at least eligible for temporary certification at the grade level that your community requires. So what is needed for temporary certification is that you have completed your general education requirements. And if you can see this chart, I don't know how big it is on your screen, but each grade level has a general education requirement. Grade 1 has to have at least a bachelor's degree, and also grade 2 has to have a bachelor's degree. Grade 3 has to have that minimum of 54 credits of college completed, with 27 of those in the liberal arts. That's the general education requirement. So if you have those, you can become temporarily certified at that grade level. And then in order to become regular certified, fully certified, you need to complete your library specific education. For grade 1, that's a master's degree. And if you have temporary grade 1 certification, you can, if you are within 1 year of completing your master's degree, you can apply for temporary certification at grade 1 level, and then you can complete your master's degree and become regular certified. If you have a bachelor's degree, you can become grade 2 certified, and then you have to take 4 additional library courses, and you can continue to renew your temporary certificate for up to 4 years to complete those courses. Grade 3 is similar. You have to have those 54 credits, and once you do, you can apply for temporary certification, and you have 4 years to complete the 4 required courses for full certification. The big thing to note there is that grade 1 temporary certification cannot be renewed. It's only valid for 1 year. So once you have applied, you do have to be within 1 year of completing your master's degree. And this chart, again, available on our website, spells all that out. So I recommend if this is something you need to know, you download the chart and take a look at it, because I think it lays it out fairly clearly. Once you've figured out what you have to apply for, then the application process isn't too difficult. There's a form you have to fill out. You'll see this application form anytime you're applying for any grade or status of certification. It's the same form, PI 2450, that is on our website. So you can download that there. Second, okay. And then if this is the first time you're applying, you need to provide us with proof of your education. So on our website and in the certification manual, there are some lists that specify exactly what you need for each grade and status of certificate. So you can take a look at those lists and see exactly what documentation you need. If it's your first application ever to us, you're going to need to provide us with your education proof. So that would be a copy of your diploma or a transcript that demonstrates that you have what you need for your grade level. You'll need proof of library-specific education, if any. So if you have already completed some of those 4 courses, or if you're applying for grade 1 and you're halfway through your master's degree, we'll need to see a transcript that shows that you're going to be able to finish it within a year. And then the one thing that gets forgotten all the time is if you are applying for grade 2 or 3 temporary certification, I need to see a schedule that shows me that you have looked up what courses you need and where you're going to take them and when, so that we know you have a plan for completing your 4 courses within your 4 years, your maximum 4 years of temporary certification. And that's the number one thing I have to reach back out to people about is you gave me everything except that schedule. We do have a optional form on our website that you can use to provide us that schedule. You can also just type it out in an email or an informal document. It's really just showing me that you know that you have these courses to complete and a time limit within which you have to complete them, and that you have a plan to get that done on time. So Jenny, I'm sort of transitioning now. That is the basic like first time application information. Do we have any other questions that have come in?
No, you are doing such a fantastic job that
All
nobody
right.
has any questions yet.
Either that or they're just totally overwhelmed with all the information I'm throwing at them. So either way is good. We'll have plenty of time for questions at the end as well.
Okay.
All right, so let's assume that you are a new librarian, you have not completed everything that you need to complete, and you are temporarily certified. How do you renew your temporary certificate? If you are temporarily grade 2 or 3 certified, you can renew that certificate up to 3 times for a total of 4 years of temporary certification to get your 4 courses done. And you're going to fill out that same application form. You're going to mark it as I'm applying to renew my temporary certificate, and you're going to attach the proof of completion of your library courses. You do have to complete at least one every year while you are temporarily certified, grade 2 or 3. And you have to complete the basic library administration course within the first year of your temporary certification. So every time you apply, you should at least have one of those course completion certificates or information that shows me that you've completed a course. If you don't have that, you have not been keeping up with your requirements for temporary certification, so that's going to be a problem. So please do stay on top of those course completions. Things that cannot be renewed. Temporary grade 1, you can only apply for 1 year of temporary grade 1 certification. You have to finish your master's degree and then apply for regular certification at that point. If you have temporary grade 2 and you had a bachelor's degree with a library science minor, which I didn't really mention, but it was on that chart I showed. If you have a library science minor, we do not require you to take all 4 of the courses. We assume that you covered some of that information while getting that library science minor. You are only required to take one more course, and that is an advanced public library administration course. And because you have to take at least one course per year while you're temporarily certified, and you only have one course to take, you only get to hold that temporary certificate for 1 year. So you can't renew that one. There's not too many people out there that have that situation, but there are some. If you have a lapsed certificate, and I do see somebody just asked a question about lapsed, so I'll address that here too. If you had previously been certified and you took a job where you didn't need to maintain that certification and your certification is lapsed, you can apply for lapsed certification. And the requirement is then that you must complete 20 hours of continuing education within that first year of having a lapsed certificate. If you do that 20 hours of CE, you can apply then the following year to reinstate your regular certificate. And we will credit any of the library specific coursework that you did in the past. So if you already held a master's degree or if you already completed those 4 library courses in the past, we will not make you go back and redo those. We will just make you have at least 1 year of some continuing education so you can refresh your skills, and you will be certified during that year with a lapsed certification. It's sort of like a temporary certificate. And then at the end of that year, you show us proof that you've completed those 20 hours of continuing ed, and you will be upgraded back again to a regular certificate. I hope that answers your question, Kristen. Oh, yep, I typed before I read the slide. Yep, that's good. And then the other thing that can't be renewed is temporary grade 2 or 3 if you've already renewed it 3 times. If you've already been temporarily certified for 4 years, you cannot renew that again. So once you have gotten past the temporary stage, you've completed either your master's degree or the 4 required library courses, and you are now regularly certified, then the requirements are the same for everyone, no matter what grade you hold. All certified library directors must have at least 100 hours of continuing education activities, including 10 technology-related hours during their 5-year certification period. And as I mentioned earlier, it does need to be within your 5-year certification period. So if my certificate started on October 1 of this year, I have until October 1 of 2029 to do those activities. I cannot count what I did in September or July or June of this year. So they do need to be within your certification period. So how do you prove to us? I'll talk in a minute about what kind of things those can be, but first let's talk about the process of proving to us that you've done it. So for each activity that you complete, there is a activity report that you fill out, and it asks for a little bit of information about the activity you participated in, and it asks for you to write a brief statement about how it relates to your work. Again, as I mentioned, if you want to do category C, self-directed activities, I will talk about what those look like in a minute. You need to have pre-approval from your system validators, and there is an optional form you can use for that, or you can reach out to your CE validator and say, here's what I'm thinking. What would you like to see from me to get pre-approval? They may ask you for that form, or they may ask you for something else. It's really up to them, but we want you to just have had a conversation with them about those self-directed activities. You can't just go and watch a bunch of random YouTube videos and count it as continuing ed. If you have a topic that you're researching and you want to put it together into some self-directed activities, then that might be possible, but you need to talk to your CE validator before you start. So once you've done your activities for the year, each year, as directed by your CE validators, some of them want them all in December, some of them have other preferences, you need to fill out a summation form. The summation form has 1 line for each activity that you did, and you write them all down. You send that form along with all those reports that you filled out for each activity. You send them to your CE validator. They will review them. Ideally, they will approve them all and sign the form, the summation form, and return it to you. Hang on to it. They do keep, most of the time, a courtesy copy at the system level, but they're not required to. It's your job to keep track of your own certification, your continuing education forms, because you will need those when you come to apply for renewing your certificate in 5 years. And this is another thing that's available on our website. Again, it's probably kind of small on your screen, but it is breaking down what it looks like to have different categories of continuing education. There's all kinds of different things you can do for continuing ed to maintain your certificate. Category A is 4 credit classes. So if you're taking a course at a university or technical college, and you're going to get a grade and you're going to get some credit hours on your transcript, those are category A, and those are pretty easy to define. We can look at a transcript or a course completion certificate to prove that you've taken those. Category B is the most common thing that we see from certified library directors. Anything that is a training and education with planned learning objectives can count as category B. This might be webinars like the Wild Winter Wisconsin Wild. I always get those W's mixed up. Wild Winter Wisconsin webinar that Jamie Machek puts on every January, or Tech Days that happens in the summer, Trustee Training Week. There's all kinds of online conferences and webinars that you can participate in. And generally speaking, those are Category B activities. They're sponsored by some organization that is presenting information that has been sort of evaluated for learning objectives. Attending lectures or participating in a conference also counts as Category B. Most library directors have tons and tons of Category B in their CE activities. Category C is self-directed, and some of the things that can count as Category C include like, for example, chairing a conference committee. That's a big time commitment. You can count some of those hours as continuing education. You can write reviews of books that or other materials that are intended for the library community. So you cannot review a general fiction novel and write and have a review published in, I don't know, Book Page or something like that. That doesn't count as continuing education. But if you are reviewing a specific library and information science materials and you're writing those reviews for the library community, that may count. So there's some other examples on this chart. And again, these are the kinds of things that you want to pass by your CE validator before you start doing them, so you know you can count them. For each Category C activity, you can only count 10 hours. So if you're the chair of a conference committee and you put 100 hours into planning that conference, you can still only count 10 of them as an activity for continuing education. That is the limit on there. And you can have no more than 30 of your overall hours be in Category C. There's no limit on Category A and B. Many times we do see people who have all Category B, or sometimes people who are grade 2 or 3 certified or grade 2 certified and working on a master's degree may count all of their master's degree as continuing ed and then enable themselves to bump up to a grade 1 certificate later. But
I'm going to jump in here real quick, Teresa. Meredith in the chat said, if anyone needs it for a UW-Madison iSchool CE activity, we can look up previously issued certificates of completion and resend them.
That's very good to know. Thank you. Yeah, and the iSchool has a lot of continuing education opportunities. So if you need hours and you want to learn new subjects, they are one good source that you can do that. There's lots of others as well, but when it is time to renew your regular certificate, and you have 5 years to do this, all regular certificates are issued for 5 years, no matter what grade you're at. You need to send us the application form again, as you always do. And then you need to send those signed summation forms from your CE validator, the ones that you've been doing every year, ideally, that demonstrate to us that you have at least 100 hours of CE, including 10 hours of technology training. If you send all that, you will be renewed for another 5 years. And my last information slide here is about non-compliance. As we talked about way at the beginning, certification is a requirement of the state statutes and the administrative code. Your library must employ a certified librarian at the proper grade for your population in order for you to be in compliance with the statutes. There are a few situations where you can fall out of compliance. One is what we talked about earlier with provisional certification. If your population changes because your community has grown or because you formed a new joint library, maybe you brought in the village as one of the partners on your library, and that changed your population, you can be issued provisional certification at the proper grade level. That is not something you apply for. That is typically something that we at DPI recognize when we are doing our population numbers, and we will reach out to you and say that we are granting that for you. During hiring transitions, we often know that there's a period of time when a library might be served by someone who's not properly certified. Maybe there's an interim director, maybe there's a vacancy and staff are filling in some duties. We are glad to work with your library in those cases. We don't want this to be an overwhelming barrier for your library board. We recognize that you cannot necessarily bring in a newly certified library director the next day, but we will need to be in communication with your library about that situation, and we will need to see progress towards returning to compliance. Progress can mean that we see you actively posting your job opening, or that you are interviewing candidates, or there's some other sort of hiring activity happening. It could be that we have communication from somebody at your library who's working on getting to a point where they can apply for certification. But we do need to have communication with you, and we need to make sure that we're seeing progress towards compliance. Other situations can happen. It feels like it shouldn't need to be said, but I guess it does based on what I've seen so far in my job here. You can't just stop renewing your certificate because you're going to retire in a year or two, and you just figure you can float out until the end of it. Or you can maybe have your job title bumped back to interim library director. We're not going to look very favorably upon that. You do need to stay certified. You need to maintain your certification by doing your continuing education, following the requirements. If you're not doing that, if your library is not making progress towards hiring or maintaining a certified director, then we may have to declare your library as being not in compliance. And that could result in a loss of grant opportunities, reduction of system services, or in a severe case, it could cause your library to be expelled from your library system. We don't want it to get to that state. We want to work with libraries so that this certification requirement is being met in the best way possible, so that we are ensuring that your library is being led by qualified personnel. So please communicate with your library system if you suspect that situations are happening that might result in you falling into noncompliance, and communicate with us, because we would look much more favorably upon a situation that we have been in communication with you about and working with you on, than if you just sort of let things fall by the wayside and don't let anybody know. We are going to notice, because it's part of my job to stay on track and keep on top of who is certified and who's not. So yeah, please communicate with us. We want to make this work for you. We want to keep your libraries operating well and with qualified staff. So that's the end of my information slides. Again, I will share these slides with you in the chat. The link is there to our website that has all of the resources that I've shown on the screen today. You're going to send your certification applications to our generic email box at DPI, where several staff have the ability to check that and answer questions. It's primarily me, but maybe sometimes you'll hear from Jenny or someone else on our team. I do want to mention one other thing, that is the instructions within the actual certification manual on how to apply, how to actually submit your documents are intentionally vague. The details of that are on our website, and that's because we are working on an online application that will hopefully make this process easier. You won't have to email documents. You'll be able to go to a web interface and see what documents we already have on file for you, and supply us with just the needed new documentation each time round. I don't have a completion date for that yet. I can tell you that there is progress being made on it. It's being created by programmers at DPI, and we are not always number one on their to-do lists because we are a large department and the library services team is just a small portion of it. But there is progress. So that's why the manual is kind of vague and says, look at the website for instructions, because the website we will be keeping up to date and updating as we go, as we make changes to that process. So with that, I think I'm going to thank you all again for coming. I'm going to stop the recording, and then we will open up the floor for some questions. So give me a moment to just get in here and stop the recording.